Welcome to episode 69 of The Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. Today's episode features a great discussion with Scott Miller, Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership at FranklinCovey and author of the new book, Management Mess to Leadership Success. I am so excited for this one, so let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. After over a year of doing this podcast, I've learned some things and found trends in the kinds of questions I get asked often, and I do what I can to incorporate that into the topics for the episodes for you. Listeners have loved the episodes where I analyze a company like Costco or Apple, so I'm planning to do more of those moving forward. I've had many people tell me that the interview I did at the Human Behavior Lab with Dr. Palma was one of their favorite episodes. So I know when I find a guest that's the right fit, it can be really powerful for you all. I also get asked about what jobs are out there in the real world for behavioral economics and what businesses are doing to implement these concepts into their products, services, and brands. I also get a lot of questions about my book recommendations when I'm doing consulting or out speaking. I think you all know how much I'm reading and researching. And while I've put a little taste of some books into the podcast, besides Nudge, I haven't really dug into any particular books just yet. Well, all these things have come together to start this new series. Well, I've been calling it a series, but in reality, they will not likely be back-to-back. It's just more of a type of episode you can expect to see. When I find an author who has written a great book that applies to brain science that I would talk about on the show, I might ask them to be my guest so we can really dig into the lessons and how they apply to brainy businesses. The first of those will, of course, be taking place here on today's episode. Also, when I find a business that's doing cool stuff with behavioral economics, I might ask someone from their company to come on the show and talk with me about how they came up with their brainy ideas, to dig into the behavioral science behind the stuff they usually put out in a press release or a website. I want to help you learn about how to implement these things, how they got their big opportunity, so you can find yours too. And whoa, man, I am so excited about the first of those, which I'm going to have on an interview next month. I've had an intro call with the CEO of that business, and it's awesome. You're really going to love it. I'm super excited, like I said. There will still be tons of solo episodes and behavioral economics foundations throughout the podcast, and I'm excited to incorporate some new formats into the show, new ways to share behavioral economics with you. I hope you are as excited as I am. And if you have an idea for a person I should be interviewing who's doing something awesome with behavioral economics, either a book you've read or maybe a project you've worked on, send me an email and I'll look into it. Melina@thebrainybusiness.com. I mentioned a lot of past episodes there, and I want you to know they are linked for you in the show notes, which you can find at thebrainybusiness.com/69. There will also be links to the books and things Scott and I mentioned throughout the episode, as well as to my YouTube channel and social channels where you can always find me as The Brainy Biz, where I'll be posting some of the video content of us talking little snippets and things like that. And I always put the full live episodes on YouTube where you can find me as The Brainy Business. Again, all that goodness and links and everything can be found at thebrainybusiness.com/69. If you're already a member of the Brainy Business list, you get links to all the week's new content, including podcast episodes and new articles waiting in your inbox in the email you get from me every Friday, as well as a few sporadic extra emails here or there when something special is going on, like a new course launching, wink, wink. If you're not yet on the list and would like to be, simply sign up for any freebie, including the Master Your Mindset mini course, which I will be giving brand new details about at the end of this episode. And you'll be automatically added to the list when you sign up for a freebie like that or anything else. And for those of you in the States, you can sign up easily by texting the word Brainy, Brainy, to 33777. You'll be added to the list and get a free copy of my ebook as a thank you. All right, before we jump into the interview, I want to tell you a little about Scott Miller. He is awesome and was so fun to talk to. I know you will love him and his book, which just came out recently and is called Management Mess to Leadership Success: 30 Challenges to Become the Leader You Would Follow. Scott is Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership at FranklinCovey. How cool is that? Where he's worked for over 20 years, previously as the Chief Marketing Officer. He's the host of the podcast On Leadership with Scott Miller, as well as another podcast called Great Life, Great Career, which is on iHeartRadio. And he is a fellow columnist on Inc.com. And while we talk about some of the numbers in the discussion, this book is making an impact. It sold 20,000 copies in the first 6 weeks, which, if you know how book sales go, that is not normal. He is obviously onto something, and I'm so honored he agreed to join me today for a little chat. So without further ado, Scott Miller, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Well, thanks for the invitation. Appreciate it. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so excited to have you. For those of you who are going to be watching sort of the video of this, we're talking about Scott's new book, Management Mess to Leadership Success, which, oh, look at that, dual screen showing up on the Zoom feed here.
Hey, I'm in marketing, right? Self-promotion is important these days.
Gotta have it out there for sure. All those times that we need our brains to be seeing what's going on. So I would just love to start by having you tell, for those that haven't had a chance to look at the book yet, this is their first introduction to you. How would you sort of start, I guess, how you got here or what the book's about, what's up in Scotland?
Sure. Thanks for the platform, first of all. My name is Scott Miller, and I serve as an executive vice president at the FranklinCovey Company. Most people who are working know us as the world's most prominent, reputable leadership development firm, been in business for 40 years. Our influence is really built on a variety of thought leadership books and offerings, namely, of course, Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, now in its 30th year, 30 million copies sold. We're a large public company, and we do a lot of consulting around leadership development, productivity, executing strategy. I'm a formal leader in the company, served as the chief marketing officer for the last decade. And so you'd think at this point, I'd know a lot about leadership and I'd be an expert. But the fact is that, common knowledge isn't always common practice, right? So
yes.
Of the hundreds and hundreds of business and leadership books written every year, I'd never had one that spoke squarely to me. So arrogantly, I kind of wrote my own, and I just kind of confessed all of my challenges, and I challenged some of the conventional wisdom around the fact that everyone should be a leader of people. I don't agree. The fact that leadership can be quite rewarding. I don't agree. Maybe in the long term, but not the short term. It's hard. So I wrote a very vulnerable, I think, relatable book around here's 30 challenges that every leader faces, not just in your career, but with your husband or spouse or partner or mother-in-law or, Cub Scouts or whatever your, passions are in life. And it's done extremely well because honestly, I think, most leadership books are a little aspirational and lofty and academic. And this one's quite raw. I just kind of lay out a lot of my messes and some successes. I think it's short and digestible. And because of that, it's done extraordinarily well in the last 4 months.
Absolutely. And the extraordinarily well in the last 4 months is when we spoke earlier this week, I believe it was. So it's already sold 25,000 copies.
Right. In 4 months. And, in a big book usually will sell about 5,000 a year. So we're on track to hit about 100,000 the first year. I'm not a humble person. I'm trying to be more humble, but I am a very grateful person.
Yes.
And I am enormously grateful for those that have read it and emailed and blogged about it and the keynote requests coming in and people like you where you and I make a connection over it. So I'm excited to share some of my own learnings with your audience today.
Absolutely. I let you know that I read the entire book on a flight just recently think this one I read on my way to Boston. And I was able to read it in one flight, like you're saying, very digestible. And I really appreciate, so the way that the book is broken up, like you said, and you don't need, sure, I could write 100 pages on every single topic, but how about I just give you what you need to know about this and then we'll move on, right? And so you've broken it into sort of, if you were to take, one task a day, you could read these 5 pages. And in a month, you've learned all this stuff about leadership, essentially. So you have it broken down into 30 concepts, everything from, and now I'm going to look, but about being humble, demonstrating humility, all the way to being grateful and holding regular one-on-ones, creating a vision. I mean, it's really diverse, and to you and to other people and all of this. And we have a lot of really cool concepts in the way they tie back to reciprocity, scarcity, episodes we've talked about here on the Brainy Business before that we're definitely going to get to. One of my favorite things about this book is I felt like when I was reading it, and so we had our first conversation earlier this week, like I said, but I felt like I knew you already. Like I know all these little tidbits about you and your life and your personality.
Everybody says the same thing. Everyone says, I feel like I know you better than I do now.
And there were so many little, when it started to get a little weighty, maybe just in the story, the drama of it, right? Yeah. Then there would be this comment about like, I think this is just unnatural, like eating broccoli without cheese sauce, which, and I'm, laughing as I'm on my flight while I'm reading my book, like a ridiculous person.
Great. You know what? Mission accomplished then. Good. Good.
So I love that. It kept me entertained while I was learning things.
Good. This book is not War and Peace, right? This is not good to great. It is what it is. It's not meant to be. I had some vitriolic post I read about it on LinkedIn this week where the person accused me, in their own opinion of kind of giving license to bad behavior and messes. And I thought, oh goodness, that wasn't my intention at all. My intention was to say, we all have messes.
Right.
Let's not wallow in them. Let's not make excuses for them. Let's just own up to them and let's move towards success. And it's kind of hard to improve when you don't acknowledge your mess. I had another post on Amazon, actually from a fairly famous author. And he said, which I love, a mess is a terrible thing to waste. And I loved that because it's so true, right? Is how you learn is from recognizing when you've fallen down and being confident enough to confess it and talk about it. And I think that's my superpower.
Absolutely. And you do it in a fun way, even where some of the stories are a little bit like, I'm actually glad I wasn't a fly on the wall for the meeting with the Salt Lake Tribune. It's like the first page 1 of the book. It comes straight into it.
It does.
I invited you to be a guest, even on, I read page 1 just as an overview and said, nope, you're in, this is happening. So, but I really like that you take all of that in, and we're working right now. So a big focus in this last quarter and moving forward for the Brainy Business is on mindset and the way you look at things and how your own perspective is really framing your entire life experience, and the way that other people are interacting with you is in your own brain in a lot of ways what you're picking up on, because our subconscious is constantly scanning the environment and only letting a few things in. And so if you tell it to expect that people hate you or that it's difficult to be a leader or whatever these things are, it's going to pick up on what you tell it to focus on. Do you have any concepts from the book that you think really align with that? I know we talked about check your paradigms.
Yeah, a lot. I'll try to keep it short because I think you've opened with what is the 11th challenge, check your paradigms. It probably should have been the first because, one of the great concepts that I think Dr. Covey popularized, one of his gifts to the world was this idea of really understanding your paradigms, right? Which are your belief systems. These are deeply inculcated in us by our parents, by our ministers, by our teachers, by our aunts, our neighbors from birth. All of us have got to understand we don't have complete paradigms by anything. We don't have all the facts. We have a set of glasses, metaphorical lenses, right? Where we have cataracts, where we see things based on how we were taught. Ourselves, the world around us, our companies, people of other races, the role of leadership. And so I think it's so important as leaders, as contributors, partners, spouses, friends, that we recognize you don't always have the full picture. you always have a little bit of a warped lens based on what you've been led to be is true about people who deeply ingrained it in you since birth. Some of it's helpful, some of it's not and damaging. Our parents tried their best. I think your parents have a disproportionate impact on us. And as a parent of 3 young boys, I'm horrified, right, about what I'm teaching my children, right? Am I passing on legacies that are not healthy? So I think that mature people are constantly kind of recalibrating, reassessing. Do I have the full picture? Do I see this accurately? How am I being jaundiced by what I've, been taught to be true? I was raised in a very Caucasian environment.
Mm-hmm.
Of course I'm biased. Of course I have prejudices, deeply ingrained. Some are surface. I've worked hard against them. I'm a white male in my 50s in an executive position that says a lot about me, right? I live in Utah, where this is not a very diverse state.
Right.
And so I have to work hard at challenging my paradigms.
Yeah. And I did a series on the Brainy Business on all of our biases. And so there's one on personal biases, which I'll make sure to link to in the show notes. But the way our brains are biased to think about ourselves versus thinking about the way we think about others and people like us versus people who aren't like us, this becomes an issue so we stereotype all the time. And it's not just in the most extreme examples and some of what you were talking about in your section there. But if you were to even say, like, I have a stereotype to think that women need an extra leg up. And so when I'm interviewing, it's just here in the back of my brain somewhere that if I'm interviewing someone for a position, I might be more biased toward the female and people that are marketers. I have an idea of somebody that's in marketing that, Scott, we as marketers have an opinion of marketing people that is very different than what other people think about us as a marketing, as a group, as you've potentially seen in your lifetime.
Of course. Yeah.
So those stereotypes serve us in a lot of ways. They help it so that our brains don't have to take on every single bit of information all the time, but knowing how they are impacting you is so important. And I love the examples that you give in the book. So we did talk a little bit about generosity, which I want to get into here. I really enjoyed, you also were talking about the scarcity mindset versus abundance mindset. And so I'm linking in the show notes to the episode on reciprocity, which is getting toward that generosity space. And then on scarcity are linked for listeners that want to learn more about those concepts. But can you tell us about how those really play out in a leadership space?
Yeah, definitely. Challenge 2 is to think abundantly. And I wrote it up front because I think it is fundamental to being an asset or a liability, right? A tax in our lives. Again, I'll go back. Dr. Covey, who had a profound impact on me, passed away about 7 years ago. He talked about how there's 2 types of mindsets, a scarce mindset and an abundance mindset. And a person with a abundant mindset, it doesn't necessarily mean you are generous. It has no correlation to whether or not you donate to causes or, you give your stuff away versus sell it at a garage sale. It has to do with a belief system, a mindset that fundamentally you believe that there is enough to go around. Enough food, enough paper clips, enough budget, enough fame, enough credit, enough time and attention. And I share a fairly sobering story in the book. Well, I share a lot of sobering stories, but in this one in particular, you'll recall, I call out a colleague of mine, someone who worked for me, 15 years my junior. I actually re-recruited him back to the company after he'd left because he was so talented. And his name is Jimmy, and I share it openly. That's his real name. We went to lunch at Cracker Barrel, which, by the way, is my favorite restaurant. I love the Cracker Barrel. I'm the only person with cufflinks at the Cracker Barrel, trust me.
Whoa.
And I love the pot roast at the Cracker Barrel. You don't need a therapist if you have a Cracker Barrel, right? I mean, good home food. It can be just as good as a therapist. And I sat down with Jim, and Jim opened the lunch and said, basically, quote, Scott, I'm sick and tired of you taking credit for all of my projects. Boom. I mean, not much else needs to be said. And I was offended. I was incredulous. I was inside defensive. How dare you? And I just kind of sat and gathered as much restraint as possible. And I listened to him talk about it. And he shared several examples. And most of them I didn't agree with. But it didn't matter because he felt like I was being a credit hog. And I'll tell you, as they get to know me, I'm fairly charismatic. I have a big personality. I cast a pretty big shadow. It's kind of hard to get credit out from under me. And from that lunch, I had to realize that, you know what, perhaps maybe subconsciously I was taking some credit of his projects. Someone said something really wise to me, Melina, once. They said, you'll never have enough until you define how much is enough.
I love that.
And I had to really think about how much more credit do I need, right? I'm in the C-suite. I'm an officer. I report to the CEO. Do I really need to take credit for, the projects in my division? And so it really fundamentally pushed on me around having a scarce versus abundant mindset. Does my region or division always have to fight for the most budget? Maybe our year, we need less budget and it ought to go to operations or supply chain or innovation or tax or legal, right? Don't fight for as much as you can get. You might need less. And so it's had a profound impact on me. And I think I am a naturally abundant person, but I think I also have to remember to check back into that paradigm.
Well, especially, and I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but just being ambitious, which I'm definitely an ambitious person. I know you've said that you are as well. And I'm sure many of my listeners are and would tie back to this. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's really good to have ambition. That's how we have entrepreneurs and get books written and all of these things, start podcasts, whatever it is. But if we're not looking around and being generous, and I got some advice from a previous role as well, where they, it was saying, just always talk about what the other people on your team are doing as often as you can, to be putting names out, and just whether they're in the room or not. And I believe you had something in the book about talking about people as if they were in the room, and that I think it was that Stephen Covey wouldn't do that. See, I read this.
I know you did. I'd love to touch on that because I think it's actually profound when the time is right.
You can go ahead right now if you want.
Dr. Covey had this concept where he talked about, he calls it being loyal to the absent. And in essence, it's this concept of really just not gossiping. And I love this quote that he said. I mean, the guy's super well quoted, right? When you defend those who are absent, you retain the trust of those present. Mm-hmm. I have a colleague in this company, enormously credible, enormously competent, funny, witty, hardworking, razor-fast processor. And this person just eviscerates people in their absence. Mm. And it's funny when she's doing it about them. But while she's doing it about them, you can't help but think she's doing it about me.
Right.
And if you want to be a great leader, a great friend, you will never speak about someone when they are not in your presence differently than if they're looking right at you across from the table. Mm-hmm. Says easy, does hard. But if you want to change your relationships, I once heard someone give someone some marital advice, and the advice was never confess your spouse's sins. Don't trash talk. Don't talk them down. Don't joke about it. And sometimes I fall into that, right? I've been married 10 years. My wife and I care about each other. We have 3 boys, right? They're kind of robbing our marriage from us. That's their goal in life. Steal our marriage from us. And I kind of joke about it because it's true, right? They will take every ounce of your energy. And so my wife and I will go to dinner and we find ourselves kind of devolving into this tit for tat thing. And we know it's not healthy, right?
Right.
So be loyal to those who are absent.
Right.
If you've got something to share with someone, have the courage to share it to their face or keep it quiet.
Absolutely. And I know that is another section in the book where you talk about if you're not ready or willing to have those difficult conversations, just don't be, you don't get to be a manager, a leader.
It's true.
You don't get to. It's too bad. And those are hard, but you have to have them. And people, when you have them in the right way, this is where I was thinking a lot about framing and this discussing the undiscussable. And so if you frame the conversation in the wrong way, you can just derail everything before you even get there. But if you put some thought in and have a proper frame into the conversation, the way you ask a question, think about how they would want to be treated, even besides how you would want to be treated. And like you've said, you've had a lot of people have very frank conversations or statements with you over the years. And I think a lot of that is being open to feedback, that you're willing to hear it and not flip the table over, even if you're hurt or it's hard to hear in the moment. And it takes a lot to be open enough that people are willing to have those conversations with you. And some of that comes with being willing to have conversations with them. And if you say you're open for feedback, be ready to actually receive it and know that that doesn't mean you're just going to get good feedback. And that is actually a positive thing, I would say. Nobody's getting it right 100% of the time. We're all a semi, management mess or life mess or marketing mess. I know there are some series in your books maybe coming soon. We'll see. But we have all of this parenting failures, things that we wish we hadn't done. And so being able to talk about it is really important and can help us all to grow and be better. And those things we didn't even realize we did, like you talked about. And actually on last week's episode, I talked about one of my own. I feel like was ready to talk about it because of reading your book. So wow. Thank you for letting me share that last week on the podcast, on the episode on counterfactual thinking. If you want to check that out, all of you listening, there will be a link in the show notes. So before we move on, there's one other topic I really, really want to talk about with you, which is key in the book. It's really how you round it out. And it's a big focus. Actually, I'm going to be talking about goals on next week's episode. And I know you have some really great tips in here on goals, and they align very closely with what I've been talking about and sharing on the podcast. So I would love for any of your tips or thoughts on goals and why and how they're important.
Sure. So in the book, I take on challenge 24 and 23 are all about, setting what we call wildly important goals. Jim Collins, who wrote the books Good to Great, Built to Last, and many others, How the Mighty Fall. He's a good friend of ours. He's an influencer in our company. And he's had a big impact on us. In his book, Good to Great, he coined the phrase BHAGs, right? Big, hairy, audacious goals. And we have a book and an offering that's aligned to what we call WIGs, wildly important goals. Same kind of concept. And that as leaders in organizations, you need to be very deliberate and articulate about elevating some goals over others. Everyone's got a whirlwind. We call that your day job. But above that, as a leader, you have to make sure your team members understand what are your top 1 or 2 or at the most 3 wildly important goals, not just merely important, that if these don't happen, nothing else matters. And so part of a leader's challenge they face is to deliberately elevate, articulate, and put emphasis on through funding, incentives, clarity, rewards, communication, you name it, around these things that are extraordinarily important. So in our personal lives too. And that's a great concept. But I think what's more valuable than just elevating your goals is then to define them. And we have a very easy process. We call it from X to Y by when. Mm-hmm. And that the way to craft a goal is to say we're going to increase customer retention from 81 to 83% by the last day of the fiscal third quarter. Or I'm going to, I'm not just going to lose weight, I'm going to lose 7 pounds in the next 30 days. And then you have lead and lag measures, right? And a lead measure might be, I'm going to walk every night for exactly 24 minutes, or I'm going to decrease my calories. You get the point, right? There's some lead measures and some lag measures. And lag measures you can't influence. They're kind of rearview mirror. They're important to see, important to know, but you can't influence them. Mm-hmm. You can't influence lead measures. So the first big idea is elevate wildly important goals. Speak to them, reward to them, and align to them. Second, craft them from X to Y by when, and understand the difference between lead and lag measures. And then lastly, I write challenge 24 is to align your actions with the goals. If you're a leader, don't just announce that we're going to increase customer retention by 2 points in the next 90 days. Say, and here's what I'm going to do about it. Because in order to accomplish a wildly important goal, you have to either learn something new or do something different. Mm-hmm. You can't just ask your team members to do it. You have to say, and to increase customer retention, I am going to leave the safety of my office and go out and visit 7 clients in the next 10 days. It's a little scary for me. It's not my talent. I'm taking the head of sales with me, but I'm going to go out and do that. Here's what I'm doing. Let's talk about what you're going to do differently as well. Just modeling what you want to see in your people.
Right. I know one of the things that I always used to say, and I've heard a lot from others as well, is, once you start getting totally sick of hearing yourself saying the same exact thing over and over, other people are maybe just starting to get it.
Totally true. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. It's very true. I mean, I think I write about it in the book, right? Is once you're totally sick, you're halfway there.
Right.
That's not meant to patronize or anybody else or they're less intelligent. It's in your mind. You're thinking about it, constantly. You're recalibrating as a leader. You're obsessed with it, and they're hearing it maybe once every 3 weeks or 6 weeks or once at the town hall or once at the annual event. You got to keep honing it in and repeating it to the point of ad nauseum.
Exactly. And you think that you ask somebody for something once. I would say, I know I have a lot of entrepreneurs or small business owners that listen to the podcast. And even you think you put out the sales call or you send the one email and you think, or even, somebody who's looking to pitch a book or to do something and you send it out once and you don't hear anything, or you get I'll follow up with you later. My friend Nikki Roush says, no response doesn't mean no, for one thing. Right. And then knowing people are really busy. And so you have to follow up. You think that if you send it once or you talk with them at a networking event, that you must be top of mind or they hate me, right? You write this story in your brain.
Well, our brains lie to us, right? Our brains, lie to us. I love your example. I'll have people that will be interviewing for a job and they'll call me and say, they said they would call back in 2 days. I'm like, yeah, they said that. And, it's all you're thinking about. And they're thinking about 400 things.
Exactly.
Yes, they can call you back, but just recognize you're obsessing with it. And they have, you're not working. You're out of a job. They still have their job. So, be a little mindful of that.
Right. And then you wait, there's a reasonable time to follow up. Not, I talked to you 24 hours ago and I know you said it would be within 2 days, but I haven't heard from you yet. I'm so excited. Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Yeah. But you don't want to just totally let it drop. And again,
definitely
as far as these biases where our brains assume that something is going wrong with us, they hate me, they don't like me, they've already moved on. But like you said, they're busy or something else is going on.
Can I expand on that a bit?
Absolutely.
In one of the podcasts, like you, I host a podcast. It's actually the world's largest now leadership newsletter and podcast. And each week I'm privileged to host a different thought leader, best-selling author, CEO. One of my favorite interviews was with the psychiatrist Susan David. She actually wrote the book Emotional Agility. And she was on the World Business Forum stage, and she was just compelling. She actually is South African, so her accent is, captivating. And she's also an MD at Harvard Medical School. This book, Emotional Agility, is just barnstorming the nation. I don't know how many, 5, 6, 8 million views of her TED Talk. When I interviewed her, I couldn't help but want to hire her as my psychiatrist because she was just genius. And she basically taught me this idea that, most people confuse opinions and emotions with facts, right? That your emotions and your opinions are your emotions and your opinions, and facts are facts, and that we tend to make up a lot of narratives in our mind about what is fact when it's just our opinion.
Right.
And it's a good example is, I don't know about you, but I'll often role play a conversation I'm going to have with my boss or my wife or a team member in my car, and I'll role play both sides. And before I know it, we're in a fight and I'm thinking of all the things and it's never happened. And I come in and I'm all prepared for the fight, and it actually goes very differently because I've built this narrative in my mind and I'm girding my loins for how they're going to challenge me. I do that all the time. It's not healthy.
I do that all the time. I've had so many conversations. I'll say to my husband all the time, I'm like, I can't remember if we've actually talked about this or if I just had our conversation like 85 times today.
And I think it's well-intended, right? We don't want to be caught off guard. We want to work through our argument. We don't want to be seen as being unprepared, or we're just really passionate about our outcome. And I think there's some value and I think there's some damage, right? Is because oftentimes then you're confusing your emotions and opinions with a conversation that hasn't happened yet.
Absolutely. Because I brought up my husband, I actually, this is both of our second marriages. So there are some things you learn in the first time around in other relationships and things. But we made an agreement, probably signed in blood somewhere, but that we've basically just assume the best possible intent from the other person, no matter what. So if he says something and I hear it and think, why would you say that way? It's actually, that's probably not what he meant. I'm sure he meant the best possible version of this. And I can still clarify and ask a question, but where I can say, I'm pretty sure I heard that wrong. Can you re-explain or whatever it is? But we both just assume the best. And that's sort of, surrounding yourself with good people so that you can actually...
assume good intent, right? And also so that people don't have to assume good intent, declare your intent, right? My intent is to give you some feedback, not hurt your feelings. I might say this wrong, so forgive the words that I use. I might need a do-over. Here's my intent in telling you this. That goes a long way.
I do love, and I'm glad that you brought that up. I know throughout the book, and this is some of that framing I was talking about, there were multiple points where you gave, whether it was intentional or not. I know that my listeners and a lot of people just really enjoy having the script instead of, like you said, just having this aspirational theory of what you can do. But in your case, showing not so much as like, don't say this, say this instead, but in the way you said, like, this is the story of what happened. And here's another way you could have approached, or I had this other conversation with someone and said it this way. I think there are a couple times where you do specifically say, try to say this or this or this. Yeah. These have worked as far as sort of a formula for speaking, but I really enjoy that practical application that's within the book.
If only someone had written this book 25 years ago and given it to me, I'd be a lot better off.
Oh, we all learn from our messes. So, Scott, what would you say if you were just going to sum up the book and why it's important and relates to sort of this brain science in, just one or two sentences really quick? Why does this matter? What's your elevator pitch as far as the book?
Yeah, I think that leadership in organizations has been positioned as it's a little bit easier, follow these things, kind of just do what got you here, we'll get you there kind of mentality. I just think it's wrong. I think that leadership is hard. It's not for everyone. Everyone's got a mess, and that acknowledging and understanding that, we're kind of led to believe that we're supposed to be the smartest person in the room and have all the answers as leaders. And, the buck stops with us. Our job as leaders is to be not the geniuses in the room, but the genius makers, to quote Liz Wiseman, who wrote the book Multipliers. That your job is to be a talent magnet, to attract and retain great talent. For too long, I thought my job was to be the smartest person. No, my job is to find the smartest person and bring them into an organization. So I think be very cognizant of when your brain's lying to you, when you're confusing, fact and fiction, challenge your paradigms, own your mess, just own it, be vulnerable. I think I was asked last week to define leadership by another interview. And I said, I think it's a combination of confidence and vulnerability.
Absolutely.
Those are two core leadership talents, because you can be confident and still be humble, and you can be vulnerable and still be influential. I think people want to relate to their leaders. They want to lessen the distance between them and you. And so own your mess, move to success. Don't wallow in your mess, but just call it out, because everyone knows your messes. The receptionist, the boss, your people, your team, they're talking about them. So why not just own up to them and make it safe to talk about them and take some risks and let them own their mess too, because they won't own theirs if you don't own yours.
Absolutely. And I would say too, that definitely ties back for all the brands on social media and whatnot. Now in a world where everybody can see everybody else's dirty laundry and we're talking about it and you see it everywhere, the brands that come in and say, hey, thanks for letting us know we've made a change, we saw this, or they can kind of make fun of themselves. You just relate to them so much better. And that's how brands are personalities, just like any person. So the way that they can implement makes a really big difference.
Well said. Hey, you should be in marketing. That's great.
Hey, I'll consider that for future.
You should write a book.
Hey, that sounds like a great idea.
Well, maybe I'll help you. I'd be honored to someday.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much. As some of my listeners know, that's definitely in the mix and that is on the horizon. So thank you, Scott. I appreciate it so much. And I know you mentioned your podcast. I believe you have two.
I do.
And so if we were to say, go ahead and give us the names of those, and then just sort of best way for people to follow you and love what you have going on. We've obviously linked to the book and several of your socials in the show notes, but tell us about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So the big one that I think would be most interesting is this On Leadership series. It's actually an email that comes out every Tuesday. It's a subscription email newsletter that includes an audio and video interview, much like today's, with usually people much smarter than me I interview. And you can visit FranklinCovey.com. It's called On Leadership. Subscribe to it. It comes out every Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. And it's easy to get. Sign up your friends and family. And then you can find me, of course, on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. LinkedIn, probably the best. I write a weekly column for Inc. magazine. I write monthly for Thrive Global. I've authored this book, Management Mess. I'm the new author of a book out on October 8th called Everyone Deserves a Great Manager. I've co-authored it with two Franklin Covey colleagues. We think it will be a big book. It follows 6 critical practices that if you want to have a great team, that every manager actually does. So that's kind of my shtick.
I love it. And I think as you were saying all of that, that's one of the things I've talked about a little bit too, is just, busy is a mindset thing as well, right? And a place where we can get kind of sucked into not having enough time if we have our mindset wrong. You accomplish so many things, right? In so many places. You have your 2 podcasts and books coming out, and
too much.
You can, but having that abundant, there's enough time, there's enough capacity. I can make this happen, I think has helped you immensely in what you've already done.
And I think also by having so many balls, I've realized I've had too many balls. So I'm actually going to I host a weekly radio program on iHeartRadio called Great Life, Great Career. It's been very popular. I've been quite pleased with it. It was ready for syndication. And I just realized I was kind of spreading myself too thin. I want to speak and write more. I want to focus on the main On Leadership podcast. I'm actually letting the radio program go. Maybe I'll regret it. Maybe I won't. But I want to stop doing a lot of things at B level and do more things at A level. And it kind of took me doing some things at B level to recognize that.
Absolutely. It's not one of your wigs at this point.
It's not one of my wigs. Well said.
All right. Well, on that, I will say thank you so much, Scott, for joining us here today.
My honor.
And there will be links in the show notes, of course. So have a wonderful day.
You too as well.
Wow. So much amazing knowledge and benefit for all of us. I think I could talk with Scott all day long, and I really, truly loved his book. It's easily digestible and so fun to read. And one of the reasons I picked it is because of how well it lines up with concepts and tips I talk about here on the podcast. It might not always use the same terms, but the tips are in great alignment, and you have a leg up on anyone else who would pick up this book, because you could read it and think, that sounds like a reframe, and use the foundational knowledge I've given you from the Brainy Business podcast to take all those learnings a step further. As a reminder, there are links to Scott's book, so you can pick one up for yourself, and all the other things we referenced in the episode at brainybusiness.com/69. And again, thank you so much, Scott, for joining me here today on the podcast. If you were excited about the WIG conversation, getting your own wildly important goal or BHAG or whatever you want to call it, sign up for my free Master Your Mindset mini course from the Brainy Business right now. It has video and worksheets from me helping you to narrow down to your top 3 goals so you're ready to focus and start achieving them. As I've said before, the full Brainy Mindset course is going on sale in just over 2 weeks. And when you sign up for that mini course, you'll automatically be put on the wait list for that. This course is going to be a weekly live session with me where, yes, you will all be there. You can ask me questions. I'm going to be teaching you live, and I'm going to explain why we have mindset issues, not just what they are and some aspirational. I'm going to be giving you a step-by-step guide to get to the other side of any mindset issue that comes your way. The steps here can be applied to anything from imposter syndrome to money mindset, and you can use them again and again once you've mastered them in this 6-week course with me. We're going to tackle that first one together. How amazing will 2020 be when you've pushed through that big mindset block and are confident in the next step in your business? What if I told you that you could have that? Live that dream with live access to me every week for 6 weeks for only $199, including ongoing regular access in our closed Facebook group throughout the course where you can ask any mindset question, and I'll be there to help you along with your brand new support system of other mindset tacklers going through the same stuff you are. Sound fantastic? I think so. It's less than $35 a week to go through the steps and tackle your mindset blocks and start 2020 with a bang. sounds like a steal to me. And now is your time to get on the waiting list, which you can do by getting your free Master Your Mindset mini course. You'll get a jump on the process and be the first to know when the course is going live so you can claim your spot. You can sign up and get all the details from today's episode at thebrainybusiness.com/69. And just like that, Episode 69 with Scott Miller, author of Management Mess to Leadership Success, is in the books. Pun intended, of course. Thank you again, Scott, for joining us today. Next week, as I alluded to in the episode, we're talking about goals. It's going to be an incredibly effective episode. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.